Are we recording? Yeah. Okay. Well, good morning. This is Heather from NICED. I am here with Christy Tooker from Questar, and we also have some other Questar folks online. Our goal this morning is to share lessons learned from the ELA administration that started on March 27th. And this is so that we can address some of those issues, those common themes, things that we know that came up during the ELA administration that we can tackle ahead of time for math for a smoother math CBT administration. So thanks to everyone who has joined this morning. We are recording the webinar. We will post it to CBT support. And additionally, we're gonna allow you to ask questions at the end, and you can always raise your hand at any time. Helene and Eric from Questar will be monitoring the chat for us. Okay. All right. So good morning, Christy.
Good morning, Heather.
That's great. Okay. So here we go. All right. So first, I'm going to give you guys an overview of operational ELA. We had more than 17,000 students testing, 160 schools. Overall, it was a success. But there were some issues, right? So a lot of you I know that have signed up for this webinar, you were involved in the ELA administration, and some of those issues may have occurred in your schools or districts. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to share a lot of the experiences and the common themes. Next slide. Okay. For math, we've got 123 schools planning to test for more than 80 districts and more than 11,000 students that are slated to test. Now, what you see here on this, you see the equation editor. For those of you that have received my emails about best practices, testing tips, and have been involved in the CBT Weekly calls, you know that this is the #1 software tool that we're trying to make sure that our schools and our students are prepared to use for math CBT. And we'll talk a little bit more about it at the end of the presentation. Okay, so first, calling customer support. So we want everyone to be prepared for when you have an issue or a question and you need to call Questar customer support. The BEDS code, please have that on hand. And what I'm suggesting and what I've heard that some schools have done is they've created little customer support cards that they've provided either to the test coordinators, to the teachers, to the proctors, to those folks who may need to contact Questar customer support. The BEDS code is that unique identifier that Questar really needs to be able to log a support issue or help you with the next step. This was kind of frustrating for some schools that called in where they didn't have the BEDS code on hand. They felt like it was kind of like it was delaying their ability to get quick support. Let's go ahead and have that BEDS code on hand, the school name. If you have had any issues that you've called Questar in the past, knowing that Questar support ticket number can also get you to the steps of where you're getting actual assistance quicker, and it's going to allow Questar to link all your tickets together. I like to see the patterns and the themes. We all do it, NICED, and that helps us. So also know what types of testing devices and operating systems, such as the iPad iOS 10.2. Know that. These are the questions that Questar are going to ask you as soon as you call or send an email, so have that information on hand. Okay, so next slide. Okay. So now let's get into the lessons learned. We want to make sure that student testing devices are charged. This is huge. I cannot express this anymore. We're probably going to get tattoos with this on somewhere after this administration. So the issues that students were encountering across the state, they were getting booted off. Many of you that were involved with the ELA CBT administration, you reported that your students kept getting booted off the computer and out of the Nextera secure browser. That's actually a security feature. So we're going to go over what are the most common reasons that a student might be getting booted off the Nextera secure browser test session, and that we heard that a lot of students came into the test session and they didn't have their computers charged and they didn't have cords on hand or test strips. So that low battery notification, that's not something that we want to have students disable or have the schools disabled. That's important, right? Because you don't want your computer to run out of battery while you're testing. So make sure that the student testing devices are charged. That low battery notification comes up, and we know that it pops up often and frequently every time student is booted out of the Nextera secure browser. The second biggest tip is that student passwords will change if accommodations, testing accommodations such as text-to-speech or reverse contrast, if those are set after a student login ticket is printed. So beginning tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., schools will be able to start printing student login tickets. If you don't already have those student accommodations set, and you set them Friday and you print your tickets on Thursday, you have a slew of students that will not be able to log in on Monday morning or Tuesday morning when you begin testing. Okay, so knowing that the accommodations that are set are actually tied to the student's access is an important point for you to know. Okay, so if you set accommodations after you have printed student test login tickets, go ahead and you need to update for those students where you've set accommodations after printing the login tickets. You're going to see the password has changed. So now I'm going to get on my soapbox about student testing accommodations. They're not only important to set early, but obviously before the student actually logs in to start testing. Okay? There are 5 student computer-delivered test accommodations that can be set on Nextera admin for a student. If these accommodations are not set and the student sits down and the student accesses, and say the proctor or the teacher notices that the student doesn't have the text-to-speech player to read the test to the student, and the student has already started testing, that means that that test form needs to be reset for the student. That could be a 1 to 2 or more hour delay to student testing. Why? Because now the school has to call Questar. Questar has to get approval from the Office of State Assessment, and then Questar has a manual process that they have to do on the back end at Questar to change the test form and to reset it so that the student therefore can see text-to-speech. Okay, so that's a multi-step process. I posted last night a PowerPoint for how to set student test accommodations. You can see that for math. That does apply for the upcoming field testing administration, and it's in the resources section on CBT support. Okay. So again, the difference in test accommodations. The difference between text-to-speech and test-read was one of the #1 issues that schools encountered this year, and we're going to post these slides later online, and you'll be able to see this a little more clearly. And you can also see this in the how to set student test accommodation slides that are out there now. But there's a difference between setting the online computer delivered text-to-speech and setting test-read. Test-read is a classroom accommodation that has nothing to do with the computer, and in fact, when setting the accommodation through Nextera admin, the teacher is actually going to see that in parentheses it says by human reader. Okay, so if we go to the next slide and we'll show it again, you can see this is how to set text-to-speech. Yes, you use the online testing accommodation. You do not use the test read by human reader. Okay, so the test read by human reader, that's data, right? You're just indicating this student is in a CBT classroom, but is testing on paper with a human reader reading that test to the student. And a little later, we're going to talk about not tested codes and how to have a better setup on Nextera admin. Okay, so getting back to students getting booted off the computer, disabling screensavers and other computer notifications. So I want to talk a little bit about the computers timing out. The Nextera test delivery system, the Nextera secure browser, it never times out. You can keep that test open for as long as the student needs it to be open taking the test. But think about whether or not the computers actually have a screensaver set up or a timeout set up. If the student is, for ELA, perhaps students were writing long essays, right? So they were writing their essays, they were composing them, they were, thinking about their ideas on the scratch paper, and if a screensaver was set up, the computer was going into screensaver mode, and that was actually logging the student out, right? Because the security feature in the Nextera Secure Browser is that if the secure browser thinks that the computer is trying to access, say, the internet or do anything else on the computer outside of the secure browser, the test will stop. It'll log the student out. So think about like if a student also has, say, an email client open, and that email client is open, and maybe the student has a meeting set up for English class at 11 o'clock, and that meeting notification pops up. That again, that's going to log that student out of the Nextera Secure Browser. So all these things we want us to think about as we go into the math administration. Next. Okay. One thing that students did not know, and we could have made clearer with ELA, is that highlighting and the answer eliminator features, they do not persist when a student logs out or pauses a test. And that means that, so a student has highlighted, and here we have some math examples. The student has highlighted some important information in the test question, and they've also eliminated 2 answers. The student has done significant work. Well, if the student pauses the test to go to the bathroom and then logs back in, that work is lost for highlighting and for the answer eliminator. However, what's not lost are notes. So if the student has made a note to themselves, and remember, notes are indicated on the review screen, so the student can always come back to a note. Those will always be there regardless of whether or not the student has paused the test, exited the test, or accessed the test session at another time. So Wi-Fi, we had a lot of issues with Wi-Fi throughout the state for ELA. Some test tips. So if students have a one-to-one device situation, they may be be set up to a Wi-Fi in the school that they're used to walking into school every morning, and their computer automatically connects to, like, say, the guest Wi-Fi in the cafeteria. For CBT, a lot of schools purchased individual Wi-Fis, and they had them set up in the testing location. Well, we had instances where, like, Wi-Fi was hopping among different Wi-Fis, say if those testing classrooms were, like, close to each other. So one test tip is you might want to consider having those testing devices for getting other Wi-Fi connections, right? So that's something that can be done on the computer. It could be, quite a task to do that, but it'll help. If any schools encountered that Wi-Fi hopping situation with ELA, please consider that for math. And also, we know it may not be realistic to have Wi-Fi, the guest Wi-Fi disabled in the school. There could be other classrooms and programs that totally need that Wi-Fi to continue running during the test administration. But again, we want to make sure that you're aware of this, and this is something to check if you are encountering some Wi-Fi issues. Okay. So now I'm going to go through a couple tips for proctors and students. So the first one, when talking about the Wi-Fi indicator and Wi-Fi hopping, say a student's Wi-Fi has hopped, right, and it's picking up the guest Wi-Fi that's over, way across the school. The internet, the signal may not be very strong, and the student may actually not be online during testing. We want to make sure that both proctors and students are familiar. Where is this indication in the Nextera Secure Browser? You can see down on the right, the arrow is pointing to the little green arrow check that indicates that student, while testing, is online. A red X pops up. And from a lot of schools that I talked to throughout the ELA administration, they definitely saw that red X. The red X has popped up. We think it's just a best practice don't try to submit the test, you're not actually going to be able to submit the test. Like, this is where we had schools reporting that the test is just spinning, right? It's submitting and the Nextera secure browser is not doing anything. That's because the secure browser wasn't online. So students shouldn't try to submit the test, but they should know, and proctors should know, that those test answers, they are preserved, right? They are saved on the computer, and any answers, keep in mind, have already been submitted to Questar in the 60-second heartbeat that is always sending information back and forth while students are testing. So Proctor Pens. So there are a couple details that we want to make sure that all our proctors are aware of, test coordinators. So the Proctor Pen should be on hand. The proctor should know where they are. They are available from the home page on Nextera admin. The Proctor Pen should never be distributed to students. We did have some issues where the Proctor Pen was shared with students during ELA. So please don't do that. Schools can change the Proctor Pen at any time, but they have to have a communication plan for how to make sure that proctors know that Proctor Pen. These students, they need the Proctor Pen to log back into the test if they paused it, say, for going to the bathroom. And this is one of the top calls to Questar customer support. Where is the Proctor Pen? How do I find the Proctor Pen? So another note is that Proctor Pens are case sensitive, right? So other login credentials for Nextera secure browsers, such as the NICES ID and the test session passwords, they're not case sensitive, but that Proctor Pen is. And also the Proctor Pens do not change among test administrations. If you had a Proctor Pen for ELA, it's not changed for math. However, the school can change that, and it might be a best practice to go ahead and change it and have a new Proctor Pen for math. It's not required, best practice. And then keep in mind that Proctor Pen also could persist and be the same for field testing. So the proctor should instruct all students to confirm the cover page of the student's test session. Okay, so many of you know that we encountered a situation where 64 students on day 1 of ELA were served the wrong test. They were served the grade 4 ELA test. Some schools that called, they had proctors that noticed that immediately and backed the students out. And that's what we want. We want to make sure that we're looking at those cover pages. The same cover pages that are available in the print test do show up on the online version. So best practice, let's make sure and note those cover pages. And again, we shouldn't have delivered the wrong test. We totally get that. But in case there is a technical issue, let's just make sure that we have our students looking and confirming their grade level when they access the test. So in the teacher's directions, I have links that will be available just in case anybody doesn't already have the teacher's directions for grades 3, 5, and 6, 8 for CBT. This sentence is in there. Proctor should review the review screen with the student to ensure the student has answered all the questions before the student selects Submit Test. Okay? So we have this as instruction that proctor should follow. Some of you have taken the survey that we put out there for test administrators or schools that were administrating CBT. And this was feedback that we read through time and again, where schools really want the proctors to review the review screen. And then some of the comments were like, we think that NICED should make it as a policy that proctors should review the review screen. Well, we actually do have this as a best practice and a policy in the teacher's directions. So I just want to make sure and call attention to that. And this is a helpful tip, right? We want the proctor to take a look at the review screen, make sure that there's nothing outstanding that, say, the student might have missed, right? That's the help that the proctor can provide to the student. So multiple test sessions occurring in one day with different students on the same testing device. This is not a best practice to have multiple sessions in a day, like say session 1 and 2 occurring on the same day. That we do not want that to happen throughout the state, but what we know can happen is that session 1 could be run in the morning with one group of students and then in the afternoon with another group of students in the same grade level. Again, that's not a best practice because research shows that students test best in the morning. But if this is happening, we know that this is a reality with CBT, and that there might be only 30 computers in a school, and so 2 different sets of students have to test on the same day. So what we encountered is that some students had enabled device-specific features such as foreign language keyboards. So then that student in the afternoon went and logged in to their Nextera secure browser test, and the student keyboard was in Spanish or was in French, and that student then had to pause the test, log out. They had to fix the keyboard configuration on that student's testing device, and that caused the student to have a delay in testing, and we don't want student delays, right? So, and then enlarged cursors was also an issue that students encountered throughout the state, where one student in the morning changed the cursor size on the computer, and then that student in the afternoon actually would have to reboot the computer. So think about those things and maybe instruct the students that if indeed they're going to be using device-specific features, that they disable those if it's a shared device for that student in the afternoon. Okay. So I talked a little bit earlier about classroom settings, classroom accommodations. So when setting up a classroom accommodation, setting up a not tested code such as testing on NISA or taking Regents, that doesn't automatically remove the student from the functionality that's printing the login tickets. If you have a group of 30 students in a CBT class and 5 of those students are taking Regents, you don't want to print login tickets, right? Most schools don't. I mean, you can easily, remove those login tickets. But another way that this could be handled is you could move those 5 students over to another class in Nextera admin to remove them from that printing, right? It's an organization tip. And as I was going through Nextera admin and looking at some schools, I saw that a lot of schools were doing that, right? They were moving those students around and setting up these, very succinct classes, and this is becoming a best practice, right? It's easier organization. Also, on that note, if you have selected the classroom accommodation for a student for test read by human reader, and you've not moved that student out of a CBT class, that student is still going to get a login ticket to CBT. So think about that, how can you group students in Nextera admin, not only for testing, but also for printing login tickets. Okay, so when in doubt, reboot. So the first step, troubleshooting, when a student encounters a technical issue, such as one of our known issues from the math administration, was that students were seeing that there was a mismatch in the questions that they answered and the questions that were available in the test, such as the student was seeing that they answered 35, but there were 38 test questions. This was due to the fact that the computer was misidentifying the cover, sources, and tip pages that came at the beginning of the ELA test. And we found that a lot of those computers needed to be rebooted. They had been open too long. They'd been on too long. The test coordinators, they had set up the testing classrooms or the test labs for the computer labs days in advance, and had just kept those computers on. And the computers, they needed to be refreshed. So when in doubt, reboot. Okay. So another issue that we encountered is that students were provided with all access codes for all 3 days of testing. So we want you to think about those access codes in the same way that you think about the print booklet. You wouldn't give students all 3 test booklets on day 1. You give them on individual days, and as it should be also with the access codes. There is no technical hindrance to keep a student from accessing session 2 on day 1 if that student has the access code, right? So, and that is something that we're looking into for next year. We understand that, some schools would have appreciated it if we would have, put up a block and stopped students from um, accessing any test session if they had the access codes for those test sessions. But what we want you to do, best practice, treat those access codes as you would a print test booklet. Okay. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the equation editor, and I've got some slides here that actually have the equation editor on it. So I've heard from some schools that you are working with your students and you're actually practicing with the practice test in the equation editor. Yay! I'm clapping. So that's what we want. For older students, like in grades 7 and 8, they may totally be familiar with an equation editor. An equation editor is software that's available online. They're probably familiar with an online calculator and other, tools that students are going to encounter in the Nextera secure browser for math. But our grades 3 and 4 students, they may not be familiar, and we understand that. And so we want to make sure that you know that your students need to be practicing with the equation editor. I heard from one school that they even just offered a free period where students could, at will just play around with the equation editor, play around with the Nextera test delivery system, either in the question sampler or in the secure browser. So, and research shows that more familiarity with the online testing tools results in a better testing experience for those students. And we want our students to have a great testing experience. So the constructed response boxes. Many of you know that for ELA, some students encountered the CR box limit. So the character limit for ELA was set at 5,000. We set that limit based on field test data. We had field test data from field testing on computers from last year. We took the highest amount of characters that a student used to type an essay, and we doubled that. We understand for next year we probably need to double that again because there were some students throughout the state that hit that 5,000 character limit. For math, you know that the show your work equation editor boxes have unlimited character length. However, there are smaller answer boxes, such as you see on the screen here, that have character lengths that are designed to match the paper test, right? So a lot of times the paper test, like the size of the answer box is kind of a clue to the student for how they should answer. It's the same in the online environment. Okay, so just make sure that the students know. Make sure that the students also know that those tiny answer boxes, like for instance, they're going to have centimeter, inches, feet after it, and the student should look for that because say if a student is trying to also type in that box, they may hit a character limit. They can type in these boxes. Just know that any characters can be typed in these boxes. You can write sentences, you can use the equation editor and numbers. So again, that familiarity will help us and our students with the test administration. Oh, all right. So finally, before we open up the webinar to your questions and your comments, these are examples of the known issues that we posted during operational ELA. We're going to do this again for math, and we will also do it for field testing. So pay attention to when we've posted new articles. I will have the known issues out there starting on Friday so that you can sign up for alerting because you do have to go and follow that new section for CBT math. And then you'll know if there's a known issue, you'll get an email alert when that's posted. And then what we're doing here is, so we've got the known issues, but that first, some of the issues, like for instance, the question total mismatch, we knew that rebooting the computer would fix that for students throughout the state. So then we post a solution at the top of that article, and then we try to let folks know in some manner. So there's that. So Christy, Lane, Eric, do we have any questions?
So I don't see any questions in the questions box, but if you have a question and you would like to speak up, please raise your hand and we will unmute your line. So we'll take a few moments to see if anybody has any questions. Go ahead, Michael Sullivan.
Can you hear me?
I can. Hello.
Right. Excellent. How are you?
Good. What do you got, Michael?
So we're a little different from districts. We work out of Erie 2 BOCES, and I was the individual asked some questions about scoring regionally and having multiple districts that we work with. When we're working with the reports on scoring, you know, we noticed a couple things as far as when we're trying to follow up with the exact number of CBT tests that we have. Is it possible, instead of having a progress report that just groups everything together, to also have maybe reports that are broken out by district?
Well, and Christy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that if you organize it into individual projects, and that can be something that we can look at for next year, that if a district is its own project and score point, then they could have those individual reports.
Yeah.
So probably not for this year, Michael, but for next year, we're going to provide a lot more guidance based on, you know, what we've learned from score point and how it can be set up.
Excellent. Also, I have a couple of other questions. So when we were scoring the assessments themselves, some of the teachers were getting a little bit confused when they would get to a slate of questions that were completed. So they would get to the end and would say something to the effect that nothing is, there's no reserves in the queue. Is there a way of changing that language to possibly saying that it's that question's completed? Because some teachers were getting a little apprehensive and antsy in the fact that they were trying to answer that question. We weren't sure that they have completed all the questions.
Oh, that's good feedback. Thank you.
Also,
And again, you know, these are all like, you know, we'll take this for, you know, next year and how we're going to improve score point. But that's awesome to know.
and one more, I know you can do this via the computer itself, but some teachers were definitely concerned about the text size and being able to increase that text size. Now, I know you can do that directly from the computer itself, but would there be a way to do that within the Nextera program itself, where they could be able to increase that text size? So that.
And are you referring to score point, or are you referring while they're scoring, or are you referring to students taking the test?
In score point. So
in score point. Okay. Good to know.
Are actually scoring. Some of them requested that the text size be a little bit bigger, and the only option we had was to increase the screen size from our end.
Okay.
So they had the option.
Now I'm curious if they, as you know, in ScorePoint, they can view the raw answers, or they could have shown the item the way that the student entered it into the constructed response boxes on Nextera Secure Browser. Did that make any difference if they viewed it in that manner?
No, that didn't make any difference. They were just they're concerned. Some of them that just that have issues looking at a computer screen. We're just having reading.
Okay. No, that's great. You know, whether or not we need a Zoom feature on ScorePoint. So thank you for that. Sure. We will look into that. Okay.
But basically, that's what I have on my end. I just, you know, I don't know if we'll have any other questions, if we'll have something like this moving forward once.
Okay. Wonderful. And just so we know, are you running scoring again for math?
Yes, we're running regional scoring again in
Good deal.
a couple of weeks. So
okay.
We have some questions then. I know that our districts were confused by, I guess I shouldn't say the districts. When we were asking for help through Questar for information regarding specific districts and tests, not necessarily being in the queue, we weren't necessarily getting the information back that they were in the queue, I had to just go ahead and run the reports to see if there were any unread tests. And
Sure.
did notice, that some of the conversations that we had with the people at Questar, their customer service, that they were saying that some of the reports were a little glitchy, and the fact that we went in and saw a test that was unread, but then we went back to check if there was anything in the queue, and nothing was in the queue. So some of the reports were good. We were just making sure that the reports were jiving with each other, making sure that all those numbers were moving to the right. So I don't know if we addressed it all either.
Well, we're hoping that we have a smoother administration for math scoring. There definitely were some issues that were worked out while scoring was occurring. So you know what we'll do is we'll try and check in with you before and after math scoring. Okay?
Excellent. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Michael, if you could send me an email, this is Heather, just so that we make sure that you and I are connected and in touch. That'd be great.
What's your email, Heather?
Yeah, just send it to CBT Support. My last name is Klusendorf, so that's in my email. But you can just send it to CBT Support and say, this is Michael Sullivan, and I'm trying to connect with Heather, and I'll respond to you, okay?
Okay, so CBT Support at Questar?
Oh, at niced.gov. I'm sorry. CBT Support at niced.gov.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have another question. Dawn, I am going to unmute your line and let you speak.
Yes, our math teacher had a question about the equation editor. How can students
Sure.
do Subscript? Sorry, how
Say
can,
that one more.
how can students do a Subscript?
Oh, I'm not sure that they can. Let's.
Helene, can you help us out with this one?
So, yeah, the math content folks both at Questar and at NICED have reviewed all of the items, and we do know that the student can respond to all of the items that are slated for the operational math administration can be answered with the equation editor tools that are provided. There is, and I'm not a math person, so I'm going to say the subscript is the one that goes below, right?
Correct.
And that is not there, but that is not something that students will be asked to do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I had not heard that before, so thanks. That was a new one for Subscript.
Pam Raposa, I'm going to have you verbalize your question here so Heather can hear it. I'm going to unmute your line now.
Hi, Pam. Oh.
Okay, we might have some audio issues. So Pam's, okay, she says she has no mic. So Pam's question is,
okay.
Oh, it looks like Helene answered it. I will answer. I'll just speak to it for everyone to hear. So we had problems with the report on Nextera that indicated how many students were taken and the actual number of tests that were scored in ScorePoint. How do both systems interface? And Helene's response, just to clarify, the numbers in ScorePoint are the number of CR responses, not students. We do know that there were issues early in the scoring window and all of the responses were not in ScorePoint, but we are not expecting to have that issue for math. Yep. Does that answer your question? The number we took and the number we scored did not match. Yes. Thank you, Pam.
Great.
Any other questions? If you could please raise your hand.
And just for those folks that are out there, since we're talking about this with ScorePoint, there was a glitch on the first few days of scoring where some constructed response items got hung up in the API. ScorePoint released those items over the weekend, and so some folks, and you know it, if you were scoring, you saw this, that all of a sudden you had some additional items that showed up in your scoring queue. So if, first of all, the issue is fixed for math scoring, and second of all, if that happens again, we promise that Questar will let all our scoring centers know, okay, so that you can rely on the numbers that you're seeing and know that you have the exact and expected number of constructed responses to score.
Any other questions? I'm looking for hands.
Okay, well, you folks know if you're out there that send any questions and issues to CBT support. We'll be posting a lot as we head into this final stretch to the math administration. Tomorrow I will be sending an email to all of our principals and DTCs that are participating in the math administration to let you know that first of all the test tab will be open tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock. This means, again, that you can print student login tickets. Please make sure that your accommodations are set. You can set accommodations now for students. You could set them at any time leading up to the administration as soon as the student and class information is there. Okay? So that's CBT support at NYSED.gov. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.